When they found her body, her skin was completely white. Her eyes were frozen solid, and when they tried to bend her arms, they wouldn't move. She was stiff, like a board, like a piece of frozen meat from a deep freezer. The doctors said she was dead. They were wrong. This is the true story of 19-year-old Jean Hilliard. A story so extraordinary that medical textbooks still can't fully explain it. A story that defies everything we think we know about the limits of the human body. Lengby, Minnesota. Population 137. If you blink while driving through, you might miss it entirely. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where neighbors wave from porches and look out for each other, where the winters are brutal, but the community is strong. In 1980, this was the world of Jean Hilliard, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. She had just turned 19 years old. She was vibrant, independent, the kind of girl who wasn't afraid of anything, including the Minnesota cold she'd grown up with her entire life. But on December 20th, 1980, the cold would challenge Jean in ways she never could have imagined. The day started like any other. Jean had spent the afternoon visiting her parents at their home in the countryside outside Lengby. It was a Saturday. The house was warm, filled with the smell of home cooking. Jean's father looked out the window that evening. The temperature was dropping fast. He could feel it in his bones, the way farmers always can. He turned to his daughter with concern in his voice. But Jean wasn't worried. She'd driven these roads 1,000 times. Her car was reliable, and besides, she was only heading a few miles away to visit a friend. By 11 o'clock that night, the temperature outside had plummeted. The National Weather Service would later record it at -22 degrees Fahrenheit. With the wind chill, it felt like -50. At these temperatures, exposed skin can develop frostbite in under 10 minutes. The air hurts to breathe, and if you're stranded outside, your body begins to shut down within the hour. Jean Hilliard was about to become stranded. Jean climbed into her Ford LTD and pulled out of her parents' driveway. She was heading to the home of Wally Nelson, a family friend who lived just a few miles away on a rural gravel road. She'd made this drive countless times before. The roads were empty. Most sensible people were inside, sheltered from the deadly cold. Jean drove carefully, her headlights illuminating the narrow gravel road ahead. Snow had been falling for hours, and the road was slick with ice beneath the fresh powder. And then it happened. The car hit a patch of black ice. Jean felt the wheel jerk in her hands. The Ford LTD began to slide, slowly at first, then faster. She fought to regain control, but it was useless. The vehicle slid off the gravel road and into a shallow ditch. Jean sat in the car, heart pounding. She tried to reverse out of the ditch. The wheels spun uselessly, finding no traction. She tried again. Nothing. The car wasn't going anywhere. She was stranded, alone, in the middle of nowhere, in -22-degree weather, with no cell phones, no way to call for help. Jean had a choice to make. She could stay in the car and wait until morning, hoping someone would drive by. Or she could walk to Wally Nelson's house, which she estimated was about 2 miles away. The car's heater was running, but the engine was consuming fuel, and Jean knew that if she ran out of gas, the heater would stop.
and in these temperatures, she would freeze to death waiting for help. She made her decision. Jean stepped out into the cold, and immediately she felt it, that deep, penetrating freeze that goes straight to your bones. She wasn't dressed for a walk. She was dressed for a short drive with a working heater. She had on a light vest, no heavy winter coat. Her boots were fashion boots, not insulated winter wear, and she had no hat, no gloves thick enough for this kind of cold. But she started walking anyway. 2 miles. In normal conditions, that's maybe a 40-minute walk.
But this was not normal conditions. This was a frozen landscape of sub-zero temperatures and blowing snow.
Every step was a battle against the wind. Every breath felt like inhaling ice. Jean walked, one foot in front of the other. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. Then she couldn't feel her feet. The cold was working its way up her legs, into her core, but she kept moving. She had to. Stopping meant dying. As Jean walked, something was happening inside her body, something she couldn't see or understand. Her blood was retreating from her extremities, rushing to protect her vital organs. Her body temperature was dropping, 1 degree at a time. The first stage of hypothermia brings violent shivering, the body's desperate attempt to generate heat through muscle movement. Jean was shivering so hard, her teeth ached. The second stage brings confusion, disorientation. The brain begins to malfunction as its temperature drops. Judgment becomes impaired. Some victims of severe hypothermia have been known to undress in the cold, convinced they're actually overheating. It's called paradoxical undressing. Jean was entering the second stage.
She was getting tired, so tired. Her legs felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. The cold didn't even hurt anymore. It was just there, everywhere, part of her. And somewhere in her fading consciousness, Jean saw it. Lights. Wally Nelson's farmhouse emerged from the darkness like a beacon, yellow light glowing from the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. Salvation. Jean was almost there, just a few hundred more feet. She walked toward the house, but her legs weren't working right anymore. She stumbled, caught herself, took another step, stumbled again. The porch was right there. 15 feet away. And then Jean Hilliard collapsed, face down in the snow. 15 feet from Wally Nelson's front door, Jean Hilliard could not take another step. Her body had simply stopped. She lay there in the snow, the cold wrapping around her like a blanket, and the temperature continued to drop. For 7 hours, Jean lay motionless in the snow. 7 hours in negative 22-degree temperatures. 7 hours without shelter, without warmth, without hope. The snow fell gently on her still form, covering her like a white shroud. Inside the house, just 30 feet away, Wally Nelson was asleep. He had no idea that his friend was lying frozen in his front yard. He had no reason to look outside. Why would he? No one would be out on a night like this. At least, that's what he thought. The sun rose over Lengby, Minnesota at 7 o'clock the next morning. The temperature hadn't improved much, but the storm had passed, and weak winter sunlight began to illuminate the frozen landscape. Wally Nielsen woke up. He had things to do, morning chores, the routine of rural life. He opened his front door, and his world stopped. There, in his yard, was a body, a frozen body, covered in a thin layer of snow. For a moment, Wally didn't recognize who it was, but then he saw the burgundy vest, the familiar boots. It was Jean. Wally rushed to her side. He grabbed her arm to turn her over, and that's when he realized how wrong everything was. Jean's body wouldn't bend. Her arm was completely stiff. Her face was completely white. Her eyes, they were frozen solid. Wally later described what he found that morning. He said Jean was frozen stiff like a piece of meat straight out of a deep freezer. When he tried to lift her, she didn't bend at the joints. She was completely rigid, like a board. He carried her into his house like you would carry a frozen mannequin, because that's essentially what she had become. Inside, Wally didn't know what to do. His hands were shaking. This was his friend. This was someone he'd known for years, and she looked dead. She looked completely dead. But something told him not to give up. He called for an ambulance. When the ambulance arrived at Foston Community Hospital, the medical team didn't know what they were about to witness. But Dr. George Sather would remember this day for the rest of his life. Jean was wheeled into the emergency room. Her body was still completely frozen. Her core temperature was so low that it didn't even register on the hospital's thermometers, which bottomed out at 88 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal human body temperature is 98.6 degrees. Jean's was somewhere far below 88 degrees. She was, by most medical definitions, frozen. Dr. George Sather examined Jean Hilliard and was stunned by what he found. Her face was gray. Her eyes were fixed and unresponsive to light. Her skin was so frozen that when nurses tried to insert an IV needle, they couldn't pierce her arm. The needle wouldn't go in. It was like trying to push a needle into frozen leather. She appeared, by all medical assessments, to be dead. But Dr. Sather noticed something. Something small. Something almost imperceptible. A pulse. Faint, incredibly slow, maybe 12 beats per minute when a normal resting heart rate is 70. But it was there. Jean Hilliard was alive. Dr. Sather faced an impossible situation. He couldn't use standard warming techniques. Warming a frozen hypothermia victim too quickly can cause fatal heart arrhythmias. The shock of rapid temperature change can kill even when the cold didn't. He had to warm Jean slowly, carefully, gently coaxing her frozen body back from the edge. They wrapped her in electric heating pads, one at a time, low heat, slow and steady. And then they waited. Word spread quickly through Lengby and the surrounding communities. Jean Hilliard, the girl everyone knew, was frozen at Foston Hospital. The prognosis was grim. Even if she survived, doctors feared the worst. Severe brain damage, permanent tissue destruction, amputation of frozen limbs. At the hospital, Jean's family arrived. Her mother, her father, the same people she'd said goodbye to just the night before. They sat by her bedside, holding her frozen hand, though she couldn't feel it. They talked to her, told her to keep fighting, told her they loved her. Hours passed. The heating pads slowly, incrementally raised Jean's body temperature. Her skin began to change color, from gray-white to something approaching pink, but she still wasn't moving. She still wasn't responsive. And then, just before noon, roughly 6 hours after Jean arrived at Foston Community Hospital, something happened that medical science still struggles to explain. Jean Hilliard opened her eyes. She was disoriented, confused.
She didn't know where she was or what had happened, but she was awake. She was responsive. She was alive. And over the next several hours, something even more remarkable became apparent. Jean Hilliard was going to be okay. Not just alive, but intact. Her brain function was normal. Her organs were functioning. And despite being frozen solid for 7 hours, despite her skin being so frozen that needles couldn't penetrate it, despite a body temperature so low it couldn't be measured, Jean had no frostbite. Not on her fingers, not on her toes, not anywhere on her body. She had no brain damage. She had no lasting injuries of any kind. Within 49 days of being found frozen in the snow, Jean Hilliard walked out of Foston Community Hospital on her own 2 feet. She was released fully recovered, with no lasting effects from her ordeal. The medical staff called it a miracle. Scientists called it impossible. In the years since Jean Hilliard's miraculous recovery, medical researchers have studied her case extensively. How did she survive? How did she avoid tissue damage? How is any of this possible? Several theories have emerged. First, Jean's body may have entered a state of profound metabolic suspension. As her core temperature dropped, her body's demand for oxygen plummeted. Her cells essentially went dormant, requiring almost no resources to survive. Second, the extreme cold may have actually protected her brain and organs from damage. This principle is now used in medicine. Doctors intentionally cool patients during certain surgeries to protect vital organs. Third, Jean's youth, she was only 19, may have played a role. Younger bodies are more resilient and adaptable. But even with all these explanations, Jean Hilliard's case remains extraordinary. Most hypothermia victims who reach her level of freezing do not survive, and those who do typically suffer severe tissue damage, brain injury, or loss of limbs. Jean Hilliard experienced none of that. Dr. George Sather, the physician who treated Jean that December morning, reflected on the case for years afterward. In interviews, he admitted that there was no medical explanation for her complete recovery. He had seen frostbite cases where patients lost fingers and toes after far less exposure. Jean had been frozen solid for 7 hours and walked away without a scratch.
Lengby, Minnesota still stands today. Still the same small town where everyone knows everyone, where the winters are brutal but the community is strong. Jean Hilliard survived her ordeal that December night in 1980. She went on to live a full life, a life that by all rights should have ended in Wally Nelson's front yard, 15 feet from safety, at age 19. But it didn't. Her story raises questions that science still can't fully answer. What are the true limits of human survival? How much can the body endure before it fails? And when the impossible happens, when someone comes back from the edge of death, what do we call it? What we do know is this. On December 20th, 1980, a 19-year-old woman walked 2 miles through negative 22-degree weather. She collapsed 15 feet from safety. She lay frozen in the snow for 7 hours. She was carried into a hospital with a body temperature too low to measure. Her skin was frozen solid. Her eyes were frozen. And she lived. Jean Hilliard's story reminds us that sometimes the impossible happens, that the human body and spirit are capable of surviving things that defy explanation, and that hope, even when all seems lost, is never completely gone.
because sometimes, against all odds, frozen hearts start beating again.